Hi there, I'm Rolf from Intercom, and I'd just like to do a set of videos on practically understanding food safety. Now, the thing is, you don't learn food safety from Googling or reading complicated ISO standards. You learn it from seeing and doing. Now, luckily, I've traveled the world and I've been doing this my whole life, so it's just a way to give back and to share a little bit my experiences to make it easier for you, the viewer, and my client to understand basic concepts. So today's topic is OPRPs and CCPs. Why did I choose that topic? Because it's often overcomplicated. Too much time and effort is put into a relatively simple concept. Right, so let's look at the definition, the ISO definition on OPRPs and CCPs. Let's just take the OPRPs. Control measure or combination of control measures applied to prevent or reduce a significant food safety hazard to an acceptable level, and where action criterion and measurement or observations enable effective control of the process and or the product. Really, it's a bit too academic for me. Let's keep it simple. So what does it really mean? It's the in-between. It's like now with COVID-19. You get full lockdown and you get no lockdown. You need an intermediate. How does one do the decision-making process? How do you actually choose OPRPs and CCPs? Well, option one is Old Faithful, the Codex Alimentarius decision tree. A nice idea, but went out of fashion 40 years ago. And besides, it doesn't have OPRP. So time to move on. Sorry, Codex. Option B, the consultant decision tree. So lots of arrows, lots of boxes, and each consultant's got their own idea. And you spin yourself in a deeper and deeper web, and nobody really understands what's going on. So not necessary to use that. Lashla and Gapanle. Option 3 is your 7.4.4 model. So lots of columns matching the old 2005 standard, and for each column matches a subclause, and you answer yes or no, and you assign scores, and if it's a certain score it will be an OPRP, if it's a certain score it will be a CCP. Very complicated, but the main thing is in 2018 the standard changed, so this is also now outdated. Time to move on. Gooi weg. What does that leave us with? We just need two matrices, a hazard risk assessment matrix and a control measure risk assessment matrix. So the concept has changed. No longer you just need one risk assessment, you need two. One for hazards. What is a hazard? Microchemical physical allergens. And you look at whether it's significant or not, the risk. Right, so you've got high, low, medium on probability and severity, and if it's significant you take it further and you assess the control measures, and those control measures might be OPRPs or CCPs. Okay, so nothing new to food safety, the old traditional hazard risk assessment. But what is new is this one. Where does this come from? FSSC 22000's website, version 5, December 2019 guidance. So guidance was issued by industry because they realized industry is struggling with things like CCP and OPRP. It's also got context of the organization, higher level structures, organizational risk assessment, all those nice things which we'll talk about on another day. But getting back to this, so this is your control measure risk assessment. Now let's just go through that with some examples. Let's now just take a minute to understand this matrix so we can see how we can use it. Here we have feasibility of detection and correction of failure. So that is how easy is it to find a failure in your control measure and actually do something about it. Here we have severity and likelihood of failure. In other words, what is the overall risk of failure at that control measure? Now we'll see how this interacts and then see if it's a CCP, OPRP or PRP. Let's use an example. Let's start with something easy, a pasteurizer in a dairy facility. What is the feasibility of detection and correction of that pasteurizer if it fails? Well, high, because you are monitoring the temperature every second. It's on a PLC system. If it goes out, it will automatically divert. So definitely is high there. Overall risk, well, risk of failure, well, in a dairy, you're pasteurizing a lot of milk, and there are pressures, and there are pumps, and there are gaskets, and things fail. So there is a chance of the product not being pasteurized properly, so it sits there. So a pasteurizer will typically be a CCP, no surprises there. Let's take another example, still dairy industry. Let's say you're making yogurt and you've got a strainer through which your fruit pulp goes. Let's take that fruit pulp strainer. Feasibility of detection and correction of failure. Now that depends on how deep that strainer is in the process. If it is on a bypass loop and you can every half hour check it and check the integrity, check if it's clean, then it's high. But if it's quite deep in the process where you can only get to it once a week, then it will be low. So it will depend process to process. Then let's look at the overall risk of failure of that strainer. Now again, it depends. Is it a stainless steel punched hole strainer? In that case, low. Is it a nylon type strainer which tears very easily? Then you're probably looking at moderate or high. But all in all, a strainer in a dairy facility sort of nudging towards OPRPs. Let's take a sifter in a flour mill. Those sets of sifters that the flour goes through to get the right granulation. What will that be? Feasibility of detection and correction of the failure. So if one of those sieves, the plant sifter breaks, how easy is it to detect and correct? Well, very difficult. You won't know. And the industrial mills are large. You only get to it sometimes every 2 weeks only. So we're definitely on a low there. What is the risk of failure for that plant sifter? Now, it's quite low. It doesn't break all the time. So we're probably looking at a low there. At a stretch, maybe an OPRP. Let's take one that sits here down at the bottom. And that will be allergens. So let's say you're a flavor company and you've got a 1-ton blender. And that blender, you've just blended some milk products, some dairy containing mixtures, and you want to clean that and not have any allergen residues, and that's your risk, the risk of carryover. Feasibility of detection and correction of failure. Well, detection will be low because you're only swabbing 1 or maybe 2 swabs. It's a very indicative test, so it's not very accurate either. So generally, that sits there low. What is the risk of failure? That will be high because there's so many nooks and crannies in a blender that you won't get all the allergens typically out of all the crevices. So we're sitting there. Thank you very much. This is Rolf signing off. I hope you had fun. I hope you learned something. And to summarize, so you don't need the complicated decision trees. Just use your 2 matrices, one for a hazard risk assessment, one for control measure risk assessment. Get it off the FSSC 22000 site or contact me at rolf@intercom.co.za. Goodbye, tot ziens, bye-bye.